My name is Lauren Myers. I'm 35 years old, a child psychologist living in Seattle. The story I'm about to tell isn't a crime case, and it's not some tabloid headline either. It started at a baby shower, filled with lavender flowers, warm laughter, and heartfelt blessings, where my lifelong best friend stood in the center of the crowd, her belly perfectly round, glowing like something out of a family magazine. But just minutes later, my husband leaned in and whispered three words into my ear: "We have to go." And on the drive home, he said something that made me feel like I was living inside a scam documentary. "Emily's not pregnant." Have you ever suspected that the person closest to you might be living inside a perfect lie? Leave a comment if you've ever gone through something like that. Like and subscribe if you want to know what really happened after those words, because what I discovered next was far worse than I ever imagined. I remember the exact moment we first met, in preschool, two shy kids randomly paired up for a buddy game. Emily had eyes as blue as a fall lake, and I sat there quietly with a black mourning ribbon pinned to my collar. My father had passed away just a month earlier. From then on, she clung to me like a shadow. Not the kind of friend who shines in the spotlight, but the kind who held my hand when I cried through my first Thanksgiving without my dad, who biked through pouring rain just to bring me a warm cookie wrapped in foil. Our teenage years were a blur of growing pains and quiet fears. Emily went through a heavy depression during freshman year of college. She once left a goodbye note and vanished from the dorm for an entire night. I was the one who found her, huddled alone on an abandoned soccer field, her hair tossed by the wind, her eyes empty, like someone who had checked out of this world. She didn't speak, just let me wrap my coat around her shoulders, and we sat there in silence until dawn. That night, we made a promise. No matter what, we'd never let the other fall into darkness alone. Years later, once we were both steady in our careers, me in child psychology and Emily running a nonprofit for single pregnant women, we often joked that if life didn't give us the perfect family, we'd create our own. Over coffee in my kitchen, surrounded by family photos and half-written grocery lists, we dreamt of a magical future, getting pregnant together, giving birth just a few months apart, raising our kids like cousins, growing up in a world where love never runs dry. Emily would touch her stomach as she spoke, like she was already imagining a baby that didn't yet exist. Then it was my turn. I was 33 when I finally got pregnant after a long and exhausting battle with PCOS. Noah cried when we first heard the baby's heartbeat in the exam room. Emily was the first person I told, even before my own mother. She hugged me so tight, her eyes glistening, and whispered into my ear, "It's finally our turn." We started planning baby names, turning our living room into a play space, sending each other links to cribs, parenting books, prenatal yoga classes. Emily even offered to paint a mural in the baby's room, a magical forest, each animal symbolizing a shared childhood memory between us. In those months, I truly believed I was the luckiest woman in the world. Until one spring morning, I woke up with a deep, tearing pain in my lower belly. I had lost the baby. Just 10 weeks along, too early to save, too far along to forget. Noah was shaken, and Emily came that same night. She sat with me on the cold bathroom floor where I couldn't bring myself to return to the bed meant for three. She didn't try to fix me, she just let me cry and wipe my face with a warm cloth. In the weeks that followed, I dropped everything, my work, my routine, even myself. Emily became my anchor. She handled logistics, got me into therapy, booked massage appointments. She even drove me to every session. Noah once whispered, "I don't know what we'd do without Emily." I survived because of her, that's the truth. And maybe that's why, when she announced her own pregnancy earlier this year, I believed her without a shadow of doubt. I'd seen her grief. I knew how deeply she had yearned for motherhood. I believed in her joy because I'd seen firsthand how much it hurt her to watch me lose mine. I hugged her that day, gently touched her belly, and whispered, "We did it." But maybe I forgot something. Some people don't need to lie to survive, but others can't survive without being admired. And Emily, maybe she never stopped performing. I started noticing things that didn't sit right, but after more than 2 decades of friendship, brushing aside doubt had become second nature. She was tired. She needed space. She didn't like people getting too close. She was Emily, the woman who once lost sleep just to keep me steady. But then cracks started showing. For 7 months, I hadn't seen a single ultrasound photo, not one medical appointment with a clear doctor's name, nothing on the fridge like most expectant moms, no scheduled checkups, no vaccine reminders, not even a complaint about backaches or swollen ankles. Her pregnancy stories were so smooth, so flawless, I'd once envied her. But looking back, they read like polished blog posts. No stumbles, no real texture. Noah was the first to voice it. One evening, as I folded baby clothes Emily had donated for a local hospital, he sat down beside me, voice low, eyes pensive. "Don't you think it's a little strange?" he asked. "What is?" I played dumb, though my stomach tightened. "She's never shown you an ultrasound? Never talks about her OB? You remember how it was when you were pregnant? Every day felt like a story to tell, but with her, nothing." I bristled. Not at Noah, but because I'd already thought the same thing and couldn't bring myself to face it. "Not everyone wants to share every little thing," I muttered. He nodded, not pushing, but I saw the worry in his eyes. It had been there a while. The closer the baby shower got, the more subtle her avoidance became. Emily always cradled her belly with both hands, like a protective gesture, but when someone reached to touch it, like most people do, she'd smile politely and shift away. Once, I reached out myself, just a light touch. She glanced at me and, almost too perfectly, dropped her water glass. Everyone turned, distracted, and I blamed myself for even thinking it. I figured maybe she was anxious, maybe hypersensitive, maybe she just didn't like being touched. But at the baby shower, everything started to crumble. The party was held at a renovated farm just outside the city. So extravagantly decorated, I couldn't help but be impressed. String lights from tree to barn, hundreds of fresh lavender bunches hung along the walkways. Every detail soaked in Emily's signature flair, dreamy, curated, expensive. Emily appeared like a spring goddess in a flowing dress that hugged her slender figure, her belly rounded yet not heavy. Every step she took was light, as if she weren't carrying a 7-month-old life inside her. I snapped a few photos, and though the lighting and angles were perfect, I couldn't help but notice her face was still slim, her wrists delicate, no dark circles under her eyes, and her hair remained thick and impossibly glossy. All the familiar signs I had once experienced, swelling, insomnia, fatigue, were completely absent from Emily's face. As I absent-mindedly stared at the dessert table, where a 3-tiered cake with the words "Welcome Baby Ava" stood surrounded by extravagant gifts, Tessa, Emily's younger sister, walked up. She was holding a glass of red wine, sipping it as she leaned in and whispered to a friend, "Drink it fast before Emily notices." Then she laughed, her eyes carrying a hint of mockery, a trace of defiance. I turned sharply to look at Tessa. She looked startled for a moment, then grinned and raised her glass toward me. "Lamoran," French read. "Emily will forgive me for one glass, right?" I forced a smile. "Emily drinks while pregnant?" Tessa shrugged. "Who knows?" Just one offhand comment, but it hit my chest like a cold gust in June. I scanned the crowd, trying to find Emily. She was posing in front of a flower paper backdrop, hands gently resting on her belly, head tilted slightly to catch the camera's most flattering angle. And in that moment, something cracked inside me. A small sound, like glass beginning to fracture. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. And I knew it wouldn't go away. 2 days after the party, I went back to Emily's house. It was still early. The sunlight cut through a thin layer of morning fog on my windshield, casting everything in a dreamlike haze. I had texted her ahead of time, claiming I might have left my light jacket in the living room. She replied quickly, "Come by. I'm heading out, but Tessa's home." I wasn't there for a jacket. I knew full well I hadn't brought one that day. Tessa opened the door, looking half asleep, her hair a mess, mascara still faintly smudged under her eyes from the night before. "Hey, Lauren, come in." I think it's on the couch. She turned and headed straight into the kitchen, scratching her neck, not asking any questions. I stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet. No more lavender, no soft lights, no ambient music playing in the background. Everything had reverted to its original state. Empty, plain, and somehow cold. The gifts had been piled in a large stack by the staircase, still boxed, untouched. Designer bags with crisp wrapping paper sat beside them, brand logos clearly displayed. I sat on the couch, pretending to look for the jacket, while my eyes scanned the room, my hands searching under the cushions, behind the seat, beside the coffee table. Nothing. I got up and walked quietly toward the room Emily once said would be the nursery. The door was unlocked. Inside, the room was bathed in soft pink and cream tones, just as it had been during the tour at the party. But today, there was no one beside me pointing out the details, just silence. I approached the changing table. Every drawer was neatly closed, the surface spotless, like it had just been staged for a photo shoot. I pulled one open. Inside were rows of baby items, with tags still on, wrapping intact, not a single crease or sign of use. I opened another drawer, diapers, washcloths, and a plastic bag filled with thin notebooks. I pulled one out, then paused. Something was underneath. I reached in and found a stack of documents tucked inside a clear folder. I pulled them out, test results, prescriptions, ultrasound images. Or rather, copies, no official stamps. The doctor's name was faintly erased, the hospital ID section was blank. They looked printed from a template, with no actual signature anywhere. I took a deep breath, folded them back carefully, and returned them to their place. It felt like I had touched something deeply wrong, deeply dark. I backed away, about to close the drawer, when I noticed a gap between the dresser and the wall. Something was wedged in there. I crouched down and pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound journal, its strap half loose, like it had been tossed there in a rush. I flipped open a few pages. My hand froze at the very first lines. My darling child, I just saw 2 red lines. My heart nearly burst out of my chest. I know you're coming, and I'll protect you with everything I have. I turned to the next page. They don't believe me. They say I'm imagining things, but I know you're real. I've spoken to you every day. You answer me in my dreams. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor, the journal still open, flipping through pages filled with slanted, emotional handwriting. Some pages were joyful, others furious. Others read like desperate pleas for someone to believe her. That a baby was truly coming, that it deserved to be born, to be loved, to be welcomed into this world as a final gift from fate. I don't recall the exact moment I slipped the journal into my bag. Only that by the time I stepped out of that room, my palms were still trembling. Tessa was no longer in the kitchen. The house was so still, I could hear my own footsteps tapping across the hardwood. I opened the door and stepped out of the house with the seafoam green front door, feeling as though I'd just exited a different reality. A world stitched together by hope, obsession, and layers of carefully crafted lies. Everything inside was too perfect to be real, too beautiful to exist. And I began to feel afraid, not of Emily, but of what she was becoming, or maybe what she had always been. The message from Emily came at 7 a.m. the next morning. I was still curled up in the kitchen corner, untouched coffee on the table, the leather journal never having left my bag. Her words were simple. No exclamation marks, no smiley faces like she usually sent. Meet me at the cabin, noon, alone. Her family's cabin sat beside Lake Washington, tucked between tall pine trees with only one dirt road leading in. As kids, we used to sneak off there during spring break, curled up on the porch swing, whispering secrets we'd never dared speak aloud. I used to think of that place as our private drawer of memories, where no one entered without invitation. When I arrived, the wind rustled the leaves over the lake. The old cabin peeked through the trees, its wooden roof mossy, window shutters half closed, no sound except for my feet crunching softly over gravel. Emily opened the door before I could knock. No makeup, No maternity dress or serene smile. Just her. Hair in a messy bun, a faded sweater, and eyes sunken and red. She didn't greet me, didn't say, "Come in," just stepped back, far enough for me to cross the threshold. There were no signs of motherhood anywhere. No vitamin bottles, no hospital bags, no baby clothes. Only a stillness, heavy like dust settled on things long abandoned. "I'm bad at starting," Emily whispered, walking over to the worn-down sofa. I sat across from her, waiting. "A year ago," she began, "I really was pregnant, with Chase's baby." It was a winter morning, snow blocked the driveway. I remember because I cried right there on the kitchen floor. I didn't know if I was happy or terrified. She looked up at me, like testing whether I believed her. I didn't speak, just held her gaze long enough to show I was still listening. "I miscarried in week 8, alone, in the office bathroom. Not much blood. Just felt like something inside me tore open. No one knew." She let out a soft laugh, not from amusement. It cut across the air like a paper slice. "I didn't tell anyone, not even you. You just lost yours a few months before. I couldn't bear the thought of doubling that grief." I dropped my head, gripping the edge of the chair, not out of anger, but because it felt like an invisible thread had just snapped. The thread that had tied me to the version of Emily I once believed in. "Asked me. And before me, everything just flowed past me like a flood," she said. "I kept going to work, kept smiling, but at night, I couldn't fall asleep unless I placed my hand over my stomach, like it was still there." Her voice grew softer, as if she were whispering to herself. "Every time I talked about the baby, people cried. They said I was strong, remarkable, inspiring. I didn't have to lie. They gave me that image, and I didn't dare take it off." "Well," I asked, my voice hoarse, not from crying, but from staying silent for too long, because I was afraid that if I wasn't the mother fighting to rise above her pain, then I was just Emily, a 36-year-old woman who had miscarried, who had no children, nothing special. I looked at her for a long time. The room felt suffocating, though the wind still drifted through the open window. "What about the foundation?" I asked. "The donations? The people who trusted you because they thought you understood their loss?" Emily didn't flinch. "I didn't lie completely. I do understand. I lived through it. But I also knew if I could maintain the image of a strong mother, people would open their hearts more. They'd reach out, and the foundation would get more funding to do good things." By inventing a child that doesn't exist? I couldn't hold back. The question burst out like a snapped thread. Emily said nothing, then she turned away, her voice gravelly. "At first, it was just to get through the 1-year anniversary of the miscarriage. Then it was the donor meeting, then a tribute video, then an interview, and then—" I didn't know where to stop. I closed my eyes, feeling like a tidal wave was about to sweep away everything I once believed was real. Every word she spoke felt like pulling back the warm blanket I had wrapped around Emily and exposing something not quite false, but definitely not true. She said quietly, "You can hate me, I won't blame you, but please, don't tell anyone. I'm trying to stop, I'm just not ready." I nodded, neither promising nor refusing. Inside, I had no words clear enough to speak aloud. Only one sentence repeated in my chest like an offbeat pulse. "She's not Emily anymore. Or maybe this is who she's been all along." That night, I pulled out the small leather journal I had hidden beneath my bag's lining. The soft yellow light in the living room cast shadows across the slanted handwriting, some ink blurred as if stained by tears. I wasn't reading to investigate anymore. I read because I didn't know what else to do with the emotions pressing hard against my chest, cold, tangled, and relentless. On page 12, the ink was darker, like her pen had been pressed hard enough to tear the edge of the paper. My darling child, you will be the gift that brings light to other mothers. You will save New Hope. You will be the reason the world still believes in miracles. You are my promise to myself and to everyone. I read the last line over and over. You are my promise to myself and to everyone. I don't remember exactly when I opened my laptop. In the list of major donors to Emily's New Hope Foundation, the first name that popped up was Penelope Graves, an older woman, president of a charity named after her daughter, who had died during a cesarean birth in 1989. I remembered the gala last year when Emily introduced me to her as the friend who had endured a loss just like hers. What had I seen in that woman's eyes then? Empathy? Understanding? Or perhaps it was trust, the very thing I now realized I hadn't deserved to witness being offered. It only took me a few minutes to find Mrs. Graves' public email. I typed a single line. My name is Lauren Myers, Emily's close friend. I need to clarify something with you regarding a recent donation to New Hope. Didn't expect a quick reply, but less than 2 hours later, my inbox lit up. Dear girl, I remember you, and I too have something to ask. We scheduled a call for the next morning. I had prepared a gentle explanation, hoping not to cause her distress. But when I heard her voice, slow, raspy, I realized I didn't need to ease into it. I transferred $50,000 to Emily, she said, without waiting for me to ask. She told me the baby was a miracle after loss, and if it was a girl, she would name her Eliza, in memory of my daughter. I sat frozen. Mrs. Graves continued, her voice growing distant like she was sinking into memory. At the time, I thought, maybe this was a way for a piece of my little girl to live again. Emily told me about her prenatal appointments, about hearing the heartbeat. She described it all so vividly. I felt like I was standing beside her in that exam room. I didn't know what to say. Every explanation I could offer felt meaningless. But then, she paused. A week ago, she canceled our meeting to discuss a scholarship in Eliza's name for young mothers. Said she was feeling pregnancy fatigue. I almost called to check on her, but something held me back. And now, you're reaching out. Took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. Mrs. Penelope, it's possible that Emily is going through something difficult to explain. But I believe you deserve to know. There's no official confirmation from any doctor about a pregnancy. There was a long silence on the other end. I'm not angry, she said slowly, choosing each word. I just feel hurt. Not because of the money, but because part of me truly believed that somehow my daughter would get a second chance at life. Emily, she made me hope. I pressed my hand to my forehead, guilt tightening around my heart. Not because I had kept quiet, but because for so long I, too, believed in the image Emily had created. And in that belief, I found comfort. Will you report this to the police? I asked, though I knew I had no right to. Not yet, she replied. I don't want to destroy someone if I'm not sure where she stands, between truth and delusion. But if anyone else is hurt, I won't stay silent. After the call, I shut my laptop and sat for a long time in my sunlit kitchen. I stared at the sink full of dishes, yesterday's lipstick still staining a coffee mug. And I felt like the world had just lost a layer of safety. Everything around me was too real, and Emily was becoming something so unfamiliar. There might be no way back. I heard the news while driving home from the hospital, after counseling a young mother who had just lost her baby. My phone buzzed nonstop in my purse. When I stopped at a red light, I pulled it out. Over 20 messages, half from people I barely knew in the nonprofit world, the other half from unknown numbers. The first one I opened was from Melissa, a close friend of both me and Emily. No greeting, no punctuation. Have you seen the post? I barely had time to react before the next message came through, this one with a link. The post was on a local community forum, the title in all caps, red background, photos from the baby shower below. M alert. New Hope director fakes pregnancy for donations. The truth behind Emily Bradford's miracle. I didn't finish the post. My eyes scanned the paragraphs, catching only fragments, like tiny knives. No medical records. Delusional journal. Naming baby after a deceased child for donation money. Gifts still unopened. A photo of the nursery with boxes still sealed closed out the article, along with a screenshot of a journal entry, the exact page I had read just days before. I felt like I was being torn in half. One part of me wanted to call Emily right away, to warn her, to shield her before the world came crashing in. The other part had no words left, now that the truth no longer belonged to just the two of us. Within just a few hours, local news outlets began picking it up. A brief segment on the radio, then an article on the City Hall website quoting a representative from New Hope. We are currently verifying the validity of the allegations and have placed the executive director on temporary leave pending investigation. That afternoon, I got a call from Tessa. She started crying the moment I answered, her sobs choking out any words. I had to say her name 3 times, keeping my voice as calm as if I were talking to a patient in a panic attack. Lauren, you know already, don't you? Tessa stammered, her voice shattered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know it would get this far. Tessa, where are you? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. At home. But it's just me now. Emily's phone is off, Chase is gone, reporters are standing outside the gate. I don't know how they got our address. She paused for a moment, then whispered. I've known for a while. I found the first fake belly in the closet 2 months ago. I was going to say something, but Emily cried and said it was just for a fundraising rehearsal. Then she told me if I said anything, everything would fall apart. I sank down onto the kitchen floor, my free hand covering my forehead. Tessa, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you call me? Because I was scared, Tessa said, her voice breaking. You don't know what Emily is like when she's angry. She doesn't yell. She just stares at you with this look, so cold, like she's not my sister anymore. She told me if I ruined everything, hundreds of mothers out there would lose their only support. I didn't want to be the one to destroy that. I bit my lip until it bled, my heart aching for what Tessa had carried. I knew what it was like to be trapped in a warped sense of moral duty. I had been there. And maybe part of me still was. Tessa, this isn't your fault, I whispered. You need to stay inside. Don't open the door to anyone you don't know, and if you need me, I'll come to you. Do you think Emily's okay? Tessa asked, like a child, hoping someone will say everything's going to be all right. I didn't answer. I couldn't make promises anymore. Everything had gone far beyond what I could protect. After the call, I closed all the blinds, locked the front door, and silenced my phone. The house suddenly felt too quiet. Noah was still at the hospital. I sat alone, staring at the photos on the wall. Emily and me in our graduation gowns, Emily holding Melissa's baby, beaming like she had just given birth herself. Her eyes in those photos were bright, warm, and now I didn't know how much of it was ever real. I got up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out the leather-bound journal again. The last page had a single line, "My darling, I can't lose you again. Not again." No period at the end, as if she, too, didn't know where she was heading. It started raining around midnight, first just a few soft drops tapping the bedroom window, then a steady downpour pounding the roof and doors. I couldn't sleep. In my head was the image of Tessa sobbing through the phone, the forum post being shared over and over, Mrs. Gray's voice cracking during that hauntingly brief call. I had just come downstairs to grab another blanket when a knock came at the front door. Gentle but urgent, like someone tapping with cold knuckles. I froze in the dark, my heartbeat thundered in my chest. The knock came again, quicker, more desperate. I stepped forward, peering through the fogged glass of the door. She was standing there, soaked in a wet coat, her hair plastered to her face, lips blue, no makeup, no shoes. no words. I opened the door. Emily didn't speak. She just looked at me with eyes that no longer held the familiar sparkle. And then, like a puppet with cut strings, she collapsed into my arms, her arms hanging loose, her body light, as if it had been emptied. I helped her inside, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, put the kettle on, but she didn't drink. Her eyes were fixed on the window where the rain kept falling in mournful rhythm like a clock with no hands. She sat on the sofa as if her body no longer knew how to hold itself up. I sat across from her, waiting. No one spoke for a very long time. Only the rain. "Do you think I'm a monster?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I didn't answer. Emily turned her head toward me, her gaze unguarded. I didn't know it would go this far. At first, it was just to fill the emptiness. I didn't mean to trick anyone, I swear. But then, the congratulations, the admiration, the concern, it all came rushing in like a flood. She drew her arms close, like she was trying to hold herself together. After I lost the baby, I thought I was okay. I went back to work. I laughed. I helped other mothers. But inside, I felt hollow. I stood at fundraisers talking about hope and life, but I didn't feel alive myself. I stared at her, not because of what she said, but because, for the first time, she was painfully honest. Then I started imagining, she continued, her eyes dry. Imagining I was still pregnant, imagining the baby was still there. And when I talked about it, people believed me. They cried. They thanked me. They called me an inspiration. Do you know what that feels like? When you're nothing and suddenly you become the symbol of someone else's strength? I nodded slightly, not because I agreed, but because I had seen it before. In Emily's eyes when she stood on stage, shaking hands with grieving parents, hugging mothers in crisis. I had thought it was empathy. Now I saw. It was addiction. "I didn't do it for money," she said, as if reading my thoughts. "Most of the money went to the foundation. But maybe I did manipulate people's emotions because I liked how they looked at me, like I was proof that something good could rise from pain." I lowered my head, my hands wrapped tightly around a now cold mug of tea. And every time I tried to stop, she sighed, someone would come up to me and say my story saved them, that if I could do it, they could too. And I kept going. Because if I stopped, then who was I? The room filled with an unbearable silence. I heard the kitchen clock ticking, counting down towards something I couldn't yet name. Emily looked at me, not for forgiveness, but as if needing someone to confirm she was still human. "I know I was wrong," she said, her voice cracking. "I know I disappointed you. I'm not here to justify anything. I don't know where else to go." I stood, grabbed another blanket, and draped it over her. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. We sat in silence for the rest of the night. Two women who were once best friends, now like survivors of the same crash. Still breathing, but carrying wounds no one could walk away from untouched. When the sound of police sirens echoed outside my house around 8 a.m. the next morning, Emily was still curled up on the sofa, hair tangled, face puffy from a sleepless night. I heard the car doors slam, heavy footsteps crossing the dew-covered lawn. I stepped out, saying nothing. Noah had just come home from the hospital, still in his navy scrubs and a thin, rain-damp jacket. He stood silently in the kitchen doorway, watching the two officers approach. Emily sat up when they knocked. For a moment, her eyes looked vacant, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Then slowly her gaze shifted. No longer fear, just a cold resignation. I opened the door. One of the officers handed over the arrest warrant, his voice firm yet cautious. "Emily Bradford, you are under arrest on suspicion of donation fraud, financial misconduct, and using the name of a non-profit organization for personal gain." Emily didn't resist. She simply held out her hands, as if she had been prepared for this moment a long time ago. I saw her wrist tremble slightly as the handcuffs clicked into place. She turned her head to look at me, saying nothing, just a look. like someone who had just lost the very last thing she had left. After the police car pulled away, the house fell silent again. But it wasn't the soft, rainy night silence from before. It was a hard silence, heavy, final, like the sound of a door locking forever. Noah placed a hand on my shoulder. "They'll need a copy of the journal and your statement, as soon as possible." I nodded, my hands were ice cold. I couldn't tell if it was the weather or the hollow ache inside my chest. 3 weeks later, Noah and I went to court. Emily appeared in a light gray outfit, her hair neatly tied back, no makeup. She looked composed, so much so she barely seemed like herself. Her lawyer didn't argue much. The evidence was overwhelming. Personal bank transfers, promises to name a child after a donor, and the journal I had turned in, the one I hadn't dared reopen, but which ended up being central to the case. The judge handed down a sentence of 3 years probation, full restitution of all misused funds, a 5-year ban on operating any nonprofit, and mandatory psychological treatment under professional supervision. Emily didn't object, just nodded once when the sentence was read. I left the courtroom feeling like I'd lost something I could never get back. Not the friendship, not the trust, but a piece of the past. Those years when I truly believed I could love someone hard enough to keep them from falling. The truth is, I couldn't hold on to Emily, and I couldn't save her from herself. For weeks afterward, I sank into what my therapist later called delayed moral grief. I replayed every moment, every word, every time I stayed silent instead of asking the hard questions. I remembered the way Emily hugged me at the baby shower, how she whispered, "We did it." Now I realized that we had never really existed. Noah told me it wasn't my fault, but deep down I knew I had enabled her. With my silence, my blind loyalty, by placing history above honesty. Some wounds don't bleed on the outside, but still ache like they've been torn open. Losing your best friend, not because they died, but because they deceived you, is one of those wounds. I still keep the journal, even though it's been photocopied and sealed into the court files. I kept the original. Not because I forgave her, but because I needed proof that it all really happened. That I hadn't imagined that person, that friendship, and its brutal unraveling. The letter arrived on a Friday afternoon in an ivory envelope with the name of a treatment center outside Tacoma printed in the corner. I held it for a long time before opening it, neither hiding it nor rushing. I just left it on the kitchen table next to a cold cup of tea and a pile of case files I needed to review for the upcoming week. The sender's address was handwritten, small, soft script that leaned slightly left, the same way Emily used to write back in middle school. When I finally tore it open, inside was a single sheet of paper written front and back. "Lauren, they say writing is part of the healing process. I'm not sure if that's true, but if there's anyone I need to write to first, it's you. I used to confuse being seen with being understood. I thought if people saw me on stage, in articles, in stories of resilience, they wouldn't see through me anymore. But the truth is, I never gave anyone the chance to really understand me. Not even you. I'm sorry. For abusing your trust, for making you carry a secret that wasn't yours, for putting you in a role you never asked for. Maybe I've always lived in fear of being forgotten, and that fear made me build a world where I no longer knew the line between real grief and illusions born from refusing to accept loss. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll remember me as a part of your youth, not just as the worst ending to a friendship. Signed, Emily. I folded the letter more carefully than when I opened it. Then I placed it into the same box with the old journal, locked it, as if sealing off a long chapter I didn't write but still had to live through. The next day, I drove out to the farm where the baby shower had been held. Not much had changed. The string lights were taken down. Grass had grown back over the stone path where guests once posed for pictures. Only the wooden chairs on the porch remained. Faded paint, A few tilted off balance, but still lined up, as if waiting for a celebration that would never come. I sat down on one of them, near the end of the row. In front of me, a patch of open grass. Beyond that, a row of trees already shedding their leaves. The late autumn light was so soft it felt like sleep. I sat for a long time, not checking my phone, not thinking about emails, not remembering appointments, just letting the air wash over me, carrying traces of what once was true, what was a lie, and what had been both at the same time. I thought about Emily, about the child that never existed, to whom she gave every beautiful name she could think of, about the mothers who placed their hands on her shoulders and wept, thinking their grief had finally been seen, even though it all began from an empty stage. I'll never truly know whether Emily was guilty or simply lost in expectations she didn't know how to say no to. I used to believe lies only had one purpose, to hide, but now I understand. Some lies are told not because someone fears being discovered, but because they fear being forgotten. Some lie to be loved. Others, because they've grown addicted to the way people look at them, with admiration, pity, unwavering belief. And when that gaze disappears, they no longer know who they are. I sat still, staring out at the grass like it was once a stage, and maybe I could almost hear the echo of clapping, glasses clinking, laughter, and then silence. Everything began here, and from here I learned a truth we both paid too much to understand. To be loved is not the same as being known, and no one can live forever inside a performance, not even the most convincing actor. I don't know what you think, but for me, this has been one of life's most painful lessons. Not every friendship can be saved. And not everyone we love will always be worthy of our trust. But I also believe that when we're brave enough to face the truth, even when it shatters us, that's when we begin to truly grow. If you've ever gone through something like this, if you've ever placed your heart in someone's hands and had to learn how to take it back, I want to hear your story. Please share it in the comments. Sometimes just knowing we're not alone is enough to keep going. And if you'd like to hear more real, layered, and deeply human stories about life, family, and the tough choices we all face, make sure to subscribe. I have so much more to tell you. Stories that might hurt, but maybe, just maybe, will help you heal too.